Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. I can't believe it's season 4 of this show, which is hard to
Wow.
believe given we started during COVID with no idea what we were doing, and here we are. If you're just joining us, my name's Dr. Tim Baghurst, Director of FSU Coach, and my guest today is Emmanuel or Manny Diaz. Manny, thanks for being on the show. You come from a strength and conditioning background, and so we're going to talk about that. But give us a little bit of background of how you got into strength and conditioning and what you're doing now.
Well, first off, thank you, Tim, for having me
Of course.
on the show. Super excited to share, especially for the cohorts that are following your graduate program, the coaching program. Well, I actually am a graduate of FSU. I graduated in athletic training. But from there, I've always been interested in strength and conditioning and immersing myself kind of under that umbrella of health and wellness. So I ended up pivoting from athletic training and helping the kids more of in an SNC setting. I've been in sports for practically the entirety of my life. So I knew for a fact that I love movement. I love the idea of sports, and where can I find like an angle where I can really enjoy what I'm doing and also like integrate into my own lifestyle. And that for me was SNC because thematically speaking, the athletic training industry and career, it's a great career and it's a very important role. But it's also a very taxing role. So my whole point to saying that is that you have to really want to be an athletic trainer, and I didn't really feel that calling for that profession. So, but I did feel a calling more for S&C. So that's essentially how it started, and now we're here, and I'm working at Gulliver Prep, and yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. So what does your day-to-day job look like? I'm assuming that's a private school, right?
That's exactly right, and they're very
Yes.
athletically driven as well.
So what does your day-to-day look like? How many students do you have to oversee? Well, how many sports? What does being an SSC coach in a private school look like?
So it can look like a lot of ways. Last year, I essentially was on my own and was in charge of conducting and facilitating the SNC for several sports, fall sports, winter sports, spring sports. So we're talking football, basketball, track and field, lacrosse, water polo,
Mm.
and more. So I actually was very fortunate and am very fortunate to have been exposed to so many different populations that require, you know, lots of different, you know, approaches, and there are also different kinds of personalities. And with when you work with high school kids, Tim, one thing that's very challenging that you don't think about is the range of age. So that's from 13 to 18, different levels of maturity, different levels of puberty, different styles of personality that are intertwined within each team sport. So there's a lot of customizing and different approaches you have to apply with every single sport. So that's kind of been my experience. It's been wonderful. Um, this year, we're actually bringing over a couple of new S&C coaches, and I'm actually not even leading the actual program design anymore. I'm kind of more of the executioner this year. Old Bull Athletics is the entity that is helping run the S&C for Gulliver Prep. So yeah, it's been great.
All right. So you talked about some different sports there, and the one that really piqued my interest, aside from lacrosse, which isn't that common in a normal school system, is the water polo. And my immediate thought was, I wonder how you train differently for that. And so I'm curious how do you train for water polo?
Yeah, man. Water polo is actually one of the sports I played growing up,
Okay.
and it's a very popular sport in South Florida. We actually breed a lot of really good water polo players here that end up even going out to Cali, California, that's where the best world water polo is. We read a lot of really good athletes. A lot of shoulder stability work is involved with water polo, and also just ensuring that they build that base in their lower body as well. So everything from training all the planes of motion, so that means sagittal, frontal, transverse, and then maintaining the integrity of the shoulder, because a lot of water polo players have not lots of mobility, given that's the demand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to make sure they're very strong in mobility, but we need to add integrity by adding stability, right? You can't bias one side of the spectrum. You have to make sure you're strong on both, so you have a happy medium, right? So that's kind of what I do when it comes to specificity. But in reality as well, Tim, they're in a phase right now where they're building their general physical preparedness. So even if there's movements that aren't necessarily specific to water polo, I like to introduce them to those movement patterns, because this is something that if we build their base and we teach them how to move now, neurologically speaking, by the time they reach their collegiate years, their strength and conditioning coach is going to thank whoever trained them in the past to be able to move so fluidly. So that's kind of what I like to prioritize, because I at first was very fixated on very specific style training, but lately research is suggesting that's actually not optimal, especially when you're working with younger age groups. You actually want to introduce them to as many flavors as possible, especially with movement patterns. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, quick question in the chat box. I'm going to guess maybe a relation. I'm not sure. Just how many students are you coaching at Gulliver?
In totality, when you add up all the sports teams, it comes out to easily over 100 students. So it's I'd say it ranges from 175 to 250. When you think about all the team sports we're working with. Oh, I forgot to mention volleyball as well. They're a very strong volleyball team as well. So that's more or less the amount.
So let's say somebody's interested in becoming a strength and conditioning coach in a high school or coach adolescents, period. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way which might be valuable to pass on to others in the sense that I wish I'd have known this. I wish somebody had told me this.
Right. I think it's about having fun with the kids and finding strategies to gamify the training. Meaning almost we sometimes, especially with SNC and when you're fresh into the industry, you want to, curate the most perfect program for these kids to adhere to. But you also have to see what the kids are feeling in that time. Sometimes they're very fatigued and maybe it's not appropriate to provide them with that high CNS workout that you were excited to deliver to them. And you have to fine tune and, notice those little details about working with the kids. So I would say, being very flexible when working with the kids, discerning how they're feeling, discerning also if they have a game the day after or the day before. So you want to make sure you just want to make sure you're ready for that. So that's pretty much it.
Now, one of the conversations that happens a lot in strength and conditioning is periodization, right? We want to make sure that our athletes are the best physically and mentally and technically and all these, but from an S&C point of view, physically, they're prepared for when it really counts. Now, how do you do that in an environment where you have multiple sports and these athletes may want to perform well now in order to make the roster, in order to stay on the roster, but you really need them to go through the hard work where they may not be their best during the regular season so that when they get to playoffs, they are in tip-top shape. How do you design, or do you design periodization, or is it just a maintenance phase throughout the season?
Right. That's a really good question. And I feel like this ties back into what I was saying before. But for the most part, it all depends on where they are. If they are a preseason sport, an in-season sport, or an off-season sport, right? So obviously for the off-season sport, I'm gonna apply a more linearly periodized approach. So that means just honoring the overall continuum of S&C, right? So for those who don't know, that's working on your endurance, essentially building that base, then graduating to hypertrophy, then to strength, and then lastly power. Whereas when I'm working with in-season sports, let's say volleyball, that's a fall season sport, I would like to apply more of an undulating program. So this is based on what their game calendar looks like. So if they have a game on Friday, but I'm seeing them on Monday, perhaps Monday would be more appropriate for us to do something that requires a little more volume, because by the time it's Friday, they won't feel the fatigue from that Monday training. But let's say it'll be like, if I'm seeing them the day before their game, I might specify a little bit more power, but not too much volume of that as well either. And then we want to supplement that with something parasympathetic. So, that's something as simple as like finishing the workout with some box breathing, some visualization, some sports psych stuff that's going to help elevate them and also actually allow them to recharge themselves for that game. So that's kind of been my strategy last year, and I'm hoping to reapply that this year with the new S.
You don't per se develop a 12-week program where they're going through
like the phases
endurance for 4 weeks, the strength for 3 weeks, power for 3 weeks. Even though it's in the middle of the season, yours, as you suggested, is more of a sine wave of week to week.
That's right. And also just their energy levels. I mean, I might even want to, if it may be that on Friday they have their game and I'm trying to hit it hard with them on Monday, but they're absolutely fatigued from, a weekend tournament they had. I have to honor that. And it's not always about, destroying the kids, because there's a cumulative effect, right? So I have to be mindful of how they have a postseason that they need to perform in.
Yeah.
So with that said, that's why it's not always just because you have the program beautifully templated out, in every single color and with every good intention possible, doesn't mean you have to navigate it like that. You have to be a little bit more intuitive and also feel the room. So that's been my personal experience, but it's definitely helped me become more mindful of that. I've definitely grown in that sense. So
okay, so let me follow that up then with, you've got your volleyball team and they've gone away for the weekend tournament, and maybe 7 or 8 of them are trashed because they played a ton. But you also have, who knows, 5 or 6 of them who sat on the bench and did a lot of screaming, but didn't actually do that much in the games. And so they're not trashed. How do you navigate controlling for that so that they're actually doing the hard work to get better on Monday when they can, versus the whole team's doing the same thing, because it's a lot easier as a strength and conditioning coach to make everybody do the same thing?
Right. And that's a great follow-up question. Normally I'll know who's being benched and who's, starting and playing the entire duration of the game. And if it's the starters, it's usually, as you mentioned, it's usually the starters that are Coach Manny, I'm absolutely gassed. I am so fried. And they don't have a game until Friday, but they're fried, So this is where I'll kind of have to like split groups and have to bias a little more intensity with, you know, the benchers versus, or the people who are more inactive versus the ones that are actively playing the games. So that's kind of how you can best navigate that. Like I said, it's not always going to be pretty. It's not always picture perfect, but that's where you got to be very creative, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I have spent time in athletic training rooms and in gyms, and I've spent time with adolescents. I've also spent time with college athletes. And I think it's fair to say that not all athletes are intrinsically motivated to put forth their best effort in a training session, to the point where some will make efforts to avoid said training. So how do you determine, you know, Coach Diaz, I'm really gassed, I need a break today, versus Coach Diaz, I'm lying to you that I'm really gassed. I don't like working out. I'd rather just play on Fridays and avoid as much training as possible.
Damn, Tim. So I would say,
you know what I'm talking about, right?
Of course, and it's a very valid question. It's just one of these things where you over time also understand the personality of your kids, right? You know, you're building rapport over time, so you know exactly like when they mean it and when they don't mean it. I tell the kids at the end of the day, like, this isn't for me, it's for them, right? Like, they're the ones here to be better. And if they choose not to be better, that's not on me. They're failing not their coaches, but they're failing themselves, right? And ultimately, like, the team spirit in Gulliver is to perform, right? They're a very athletically driven school, and they have that driven mindset. But to your point, like, kids at that age don't have that intrinsic drive. A lot of them don't have that intrinsic drive to feel motivated to do strength training, nor do they understand how much carryover there actually is. But what I do like to do is use my personality, use my, you know, just goofy gooberness and just being a kid with them and making them laugh and making them have fun, gamifying the training, right? Back to that word. I really find that very relevant in this kind of setting, adolescent setting, because if you can get them to trust you and have fun with you and, you know, make them happy, then they're going to be more likely to adhere to what you are telling them to do, right?
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Manny Diaz. Be sure to ask questions if you have them by putting it in your chat box. We'll be back in just a minute.
The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have 2 academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring. All of our classes have the word coach or coaching in them, and they're taught by coaches for coaches.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills, even some of the mental performance behind, you know, what it goes into being an athlete. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach. So I thought joining this master's program would help me learn different ways to attack my job. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
All right, we're back, everybody. We're talking to Emmanuel Diaz, strength and conditioning coach, working primarily with adolescents. Manny, now strength and conditioning can be fun. It can be rewarding, but it's not always peachy, for want of a better word. Can you tell me a little bit about just some of the challenges of being a strength and conditioning coach in a school environment?
I think one of the most underrated challenges that I had to navigate through was establishing rapport with the coaches and building that trust with the coaches to trust your process or to even get them into the weight room.
Wow.
There's a lot of
Really?
them where like
even get them into the weight room?
Yeah, because you'd be surprised. And, I understand like where they're coming from, because they'll be like, look, we kind of already have our systems that we've been, adherent to for, let's say, for however long that coach was there for, right? And they're like, this is kind of what we like to do preseason, in season, off season. So that's where I have to climb that mountain and kind of help show them the value of SNC and sit down with them one-on-one, show them what a program actually looks like so that they can understand that there's a legitimate science to this. So that's definitely one major hurdle that I was completely thrown off with. Like, I was thinking, oh, they hired an SNC coach because a lot of their SNC coach, a lot of their coaches, their head coaches for the team sports are actively seeking a professional. Whereas like that wasn't like exactly the case. Some of these coaches I had to actively reach out and like establish that rapport to ensure that we can bring them in and have them produce the best season possible. So that's been one hurdle.
Before you go on to the next hurdle, how do you build that rapport?
I will reach out to them, whether it's via email, via text, and ask if we can, sit down, whether it's for coffee or for them or to meet with them at the school and show them, listen, Coach XYZ, this is a program template that I have that is most relevant to the needs for your sport. If we do this strategically with intention, we can yield not only better performance, but more importantly, injury prevention. Because that's kind of the continuum, right? The less they get injured, the more they can play. The more they can play, the better they get. The better they get, the more opportunities they have to compete within a collegiate or even professional setting. And when I say that, it kind of like provides a bird's eye view of how important the SNC really is. And it's not that like, oh, like we're going to bring athletes in and they're actually accidentally going to hurt themselves, performing like a squat or a deadlift. Maybe if you have a terrible SNC coach that has no idea what they're doing, that might be an outcome. But that's not the case here. When you're a certified strength and conditioning specialist and you understand the idea of building a base, the idea of properly coaching, fundamental movement patterns, they should be safe in that setting. If anything, they should get stronger, right? So that's pretty much how I try to navigate those conversations with the coaches.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so continue, please.
Yeah, I would say, to your point to my point earlier about understanding where your athletes are and like what are their energies throughout the week and what their game schedule looks like for their season, and making sure when to dose them with the right amount of intensity and when not to. And sometimes it's not perfect, Sometimes they'll be like, Coach, like before the game, I was still a little bit sore, from our previous training session. And this is me, intentionally like trying to calculate it to the best of my ability. but perhaps that was a little too intense for that specific individual. Whereas everyone else might have felt fine, but that one athlete, came to me to tell me, listen, coach, I kind of pushed it a little bit too hard, and I felt like it kind of hindered my in-season performance, right? And that's where you have to be very vulnerable and understand mistakes happen, but it is what it is. You as long as you're coming from a good place of building their base, where down the line at least it will carry over into their success. That's very important too. Or that they're able to play at the best level possible post-season for their playoffs. That's very important.
Another question from the chat, and I think this is relevant to what you were saying, in that coaches may not trust you and you have to build that trust. Would you say some of these students feel intimidated going to the gym?
Definitely, especially when they've never been exposed to a professional strength and conditioning coach in that kind of setting. Generally speaking, I feel like females tend to be a little more intimidated going into the strength room, and they also have their vanity issues where they're scared they're gonna bulk up or doing all of that. And I always just joke around with them and listen, I've been trying to bulk up for 10 years and I've successfully failed. So
you must not be a good S&C coach then. What's wrong with that?
I just share that because those aren't my individual goals. My goals are more performance based, right? But I try to joke around with them to let their guard down and then have them, trust the process, and I tell them our goals aren't to necessarily look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's to perform, the best we can in your specific sport, right? Back to the law of specificity. So that kind of helps bring their guard down. And I always tell them the same thing. It's you don't want to get hurt so that you can play more. And if we play more, you get better, right?
Yeah. You may want to reevaluate the Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm not sure how many kids know who he is anymore, but the concept is sound there. Thinking back then to just generally your experiences as an S&C coach, what would you say that somebody coming through as a coach, not an S&C coach, but as a coach, needs to be aware of or needs to communicate in order to work effectively with somebody like you? Because almost every school now, no, that's not true. Many schools now have a strength and conditioning coach. Some are well trained, some are not, unfortunately. But coaches are going to interact with strength and conditioning coaches, just like strength and conditioning coaches have to interact with coaches. And sometimes, as you alluded to, there's that disconnect. We don't trust you, you don't trust us. What should coaches know, or how should they communicate with you to make sure that relationship is strong and beneficial, that puts the athlete first?
Communication is key. So constantly communicating with each other in terms of this is how the athletes responded to, their team sports practice because of the S&C training, or, whether it's in a good way or a bad way, right? So it could be the kids were a little too fatigued to actually execute the practice the way we wanted to, or it could be I've noticed that their speed and agility has improved significantly since we've put them in the weight room, thanks to your supervision and the program design that you shared. So with that said, it's all about consistently communicating, I'd say on a week-to-week basis, to see how are the kids feeling, how are the kids performing in their actual games, and what can we either pivot or tweak to help get them as ready as possible for the playoffs, which is most important. Do we need to dial it down a little bit more, or do we need to ramp it up a little bit just before they get started into the playoff season? Typically, I actually end up thinking of a more parasympathetic or, relaxing, driving the nervous system down, visualization practices just before playoff season. So one method I have is adding a box breathing. So that's breathing through the nose, 5-second hold that breath 5 seconds, exhale for 5 seconds, and just repeat that process. And also with that, visualizing what is it that you want to do in the game. And the kids actually, from a maturity standpoint, respond really well to it, and they actually enjoy that. And that's kind of what I'll communicate with my coach, with the team sport coaches. I'll be like, hey, today was very, very easy for the kids. I understand that playoffs are starting, 2 days from now. So our mindset is to visualize more than to train hard, because we want to conserve as much energy, yet harness the right visuals for them to, actually execute it out on the floor. So.
Well said. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. If somebody does have a question, maybe they're watching this in future and wants to reach out to you or just network, what's the best way for them to reach you?
You can reach out to me in 2 ways. You can reach out to me via email through ed15@my.fsu.edu. And then my Instagram handle is anatomani. And you can ask me anything regarding S&C or even working with general population in a one-on-one setting, because that's what I do in the mornings. So I get a little taste of both worlds. It's great. And I would like to also mention training in a individual setting versus a group setting is an entirely different world. So I would suggest, as a student, tasting all the flavors, right? To make sure you find your specific niche that is aligned to what you value the most and enjoy the most. For me, I like the best. I like both of them. I think they have their own individual qualities, but definitely would recommend trying everything.
Yeah, well said. And for those listening to the podcast, just a reminder, it's ed15@my.fsu.edu or at ANATOMANNY on Instagram. Manny, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your experience and wisdom. And just a reminder, everybody, we're back for seasons 4. So every week, every 2 weeks, we'll have an episode up for you live. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you watch or listen to these. But until next time, thank you so much for watching.
Tim, thank you so much for your time.